My name is Nora Chen. I'm 26 years old. A year ago at this time, a sister Irene, who had been struggling with depression for a long time, quietly left me in her own room.
She left no suicide note, no final words, didn't even mess up the bed. When my mother opened the door the next morning, she looked like she was still asleep. I didn't make it to her funeral. I threw up 3 times in the airport bathroom, then sat on the floor of the departure hall and missed my flight. Later, my mother told me that many people came to the memorial service. The last row was filled with her students, and several of them were crying the whole time. I listened to my mother's calm voice on the phone and said, "Mom, I'll come back next week." "No rush. Your sister isn't going anywhere." I hung up and sat in my apartment for 3 full days. I didn't eat, didn't turn on the lights.
On the 4th morning, when the sun came in, I noticed the potted plant on the one we bought together had died. I threw it out and replaced it with a new one. The new plant grew well with dark green, glossy leaves.
I watered it every morning, like a ritual. I came to understand that when you lose someone, you need fixed routines to maintain your own order. Watering was one of mine. After my sister died, I couldn't touch anything of hers for her room remained exactly as it was. The blanket neatly folded, books on the shelf arranged by color, an empty vase on the windowsill. We both silently every two agreed to keep that room intact. This spring, my mother finally started sorting through my sister's belongings. She brought several boxes to my apartment and said, "You deal with your sister's things however you see fit." I knew she couldn't do it herself. She didn't even have the courage to open those boxes. The day the boxes arrived, I came home from work and stood in the entryway for a long time. They were ordinary cardboard shipping boxes, sealed with transparent tape, with iron written on top in black marker. That was my sister's name. I didn't open them right away. I moved them to the corner of the living room and glanced at them every day as I passed by, then looked away. For those 3 weeks, I slept terribly. I'd wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, my mind blank but my body tense, as if waiting for something that would never come. Then one night, I dreamed of Irene. She was wearing a light blue dress, sitting in the audience at my graduation ceremony. She waved at me, her lips moving like she was saying something. I tried desperately to hear what she was saying, but all around me was applause and cheering, and I couldn't make out a single word. When I woke up, I realized I had been crying. My pillow was wet. That evening, I came home, didn't change my shoes, walked straight to the corner, and cut open the first box with a utility knife. Inside were winter clothes. I rummaged through them and pulled out her favorite gray cashmere scarf, bearing my face in it. Her scent had mostly faded, leaving only a faint trace of laundry detergent. The second box was books. Mostly history. She taught history, and her bookshelf had 3 full rows dedicated to World War II. I took out the books one by one and stacked them on the coffee table. At the bottom of the box, I saw it. My sister's graduation gown. Black, neatly folded, wrapped in a transparent garment bag. The collar had gold trim, worn in a few places, revealing the white lining beneath. I took the gown out of the bag and shook it open. It was longer than any coat I'd ever worn. I held it up in front of me. The fabric was a matte polyester, cool and smooth to the touch. I imagined my sister wearing it, standing on the school lawn. I was still in high school when she graduated, so I couldn't attend. I only saw photos. In them, she stood in front of the library, tossing her cap into the air, smiling brilliantly. I turned the gown over to check for damage, and my hand slipped in the right pocket. It was deeper than I expected. My fingers brushed against something. A piece of paper. I pulled it out, a sheet torn from a notebook, edges uneven, the paper yellowed with age, with clear fold marks. I opened it. It was my sister's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere. Her letters were connected. Each one stood independent, evenly spaced. There was only one line, "As you think." I stood there, holding the note in my hand. I read it once, then again. My eyes stopped on the words. "I tried it for you." When did she write this? Did she write it on some calm afternoon, sitting by the window? Or on one of her hardest nights, turning on the desk lamp, tearing off a piece of paper, quickly drawing down these words, folding them, and slipping them into the gown's pocket? She knew I would open this box before graduation. She knew I would put on this gown. She had timed it perfectly. She prepared this a year in advance so that after she was gone, I would find these words in her pocket. "I'm ready." That night, I placed the note on my nightstand, next to her photo. In the photo, she wore the graduation gown, standing in front of the library, the sun making her squint. I stared at that photo for a long time. She was 24 when she graduated, the same age I am now. She looked so carefree back then, so certain that she had a bright future ahead. Who could have imagined that 6 years later she would choose to leave? I turned over, facing away from the photo, but I couldn't sleep. At 2 in the morning, I sat up, pipped the note, and read it again by the light of my phone screen. The world isn't as scary as you think. Did she believe it when she wrote that? If she believed it, why did she still leave?
The questions stuck in my throat like a fishbone. I couldn't swallow it, couldn't spit it out.
The next morning, I took the day off work. I sat on the sofa, the note in my lap, folding and unfolding it over and over. The frayed edges grew softer under my touch. I imagined her fingers doing the same thing. After writing it, she folded the note, slipped it into the gown's pocket, and closed the box. Maybe she sat there for a while after that, or maybe she stood up and went to do something else. I don't know. But I know she did it on purpose. She put that note in the gown because she knew I would need it one day. She knew I would open that box before graduation, put on the gown, and reach into the pocket. She had already started preparing for graduation a year in advance. Even though she knew she wouldn't be in the audience, she still wanted to be there in some way. On the morning of graduation, I stood in front of the mirror and put on my sister's gown. It was a bit larger than my size. The shoulders slipped down slightly, the sleeves covering half my palms. I adjust the collar in the mirror and straighten the cap. The person in the mirror wore a black gown, gold-trimmed collar. She looked almost exactly like my sister in her graduation photo. I looked down at the right pocket and slipped my hand inside. It was empty. I had taken the note out and left it on the nightstand. But I knew it had once been there, folded by my sister's fingers, placed into the same pocket and closed. My hand paused in the empty pocket, feeling the fabric. Then I pulled it out, picked up the note from the nightstand, carefully folded it, and put it back. It had returned to where it belonged.
The graduation ceremony was held on the school's main lawn. I sat among a sea of people in identical black gowns, listening to Chancellor recite words about the future and possibility. The words drifted in the air, no different from what had been said at every other graduation and in every other year.
When it was my turn, I stood up, walked through the crowd, accepted my certificate, and turned toward the audience. My mother sat in the third row, on the right. She was wearing the dark blue coat I'd bought her. When she saw me turn, she raised her hand slightly. I raised mine too. Then I walked off the stage, returned to my seat, and placed the certificate on my lap. My right hand dropped and brushed against the right pocket of the gown. I felt the paper's texture through the fabric. I had graduated. My sister had promised she would come. She wasn't in the audience, but the gown I wore was hers. The note in the pocket was hers. The words, "I tried it for you," were hers. She had come. In a way, she had planned a year in advance.
In the week after graduation, I thought about that note every day. I had it framed in a wooden frame and hung it on the wall across from my desk. Every time I looked up, I could see the words. My sister's handwriting was smooth even. The 7 characters of "The world isn't as scary as you think" lined up neatly. Sometimes I'd stare at it for a long time, trying to read her expression in the strokes. Did she write it with a frown, or was she calm? I would never know. But I started to wonder about something. If these words could give me strength, could they give strength to others too? I opened my computer and searched for mental health support hotline and sister mental health support. The search results showed a few organizations, most of which acquired professional licenses or substantial startup funding. I closed the browser.
But the idea didn't disappear. It grew slowly in my mind, from a seed into a clear shape. I wanted to start a hotline, a place where anyone could call in. No need to give their name, no need to describe their background, just someone willing to listen on the other end of the line. I wanted to name it after my sister. I called my best friend Maya, who works at a community nonprofit. I want to start a helpline. Nora, do you know how much work a project that takes? I know. Are you sure you want to do this? I'm sure. All right, I'll help you. Hanging up, I sat at my desk and wrote the first line in my notebook. Then I made a list underneath. Registration, phone vendor, volunteers, training, funding. Every on the list looked daunting, but I knew that long as I tackled them one line, they would eventually get unch. Maya and I met at a cafe. She brought a notebook filled with information she had organized for me. Registering a nonprofit requires filling a ton of forms. I've already sent you links. For the Hellline number, you can apply for a virtual number that forwards to your phone, so startup costs are low. For volunteers, you can start by asking friends. Looking at her notebook, I suddenly felt that enormous idea had transformed into a series of small, concrete steps.
Thank you.
Don't thank me yet. Thank me when the Hellline is actually up and running. Did your sister ever mention why she didn't finish? No. She never said anything. The night before, we watched a movie together. She laughed loudly and ate half a bucket of popcorn. The next day, she was gone. Then she let go, opened her notebook, and said, "Next is the training content. What do you want the operators to do? Listen. Just listen. No advice, no judgment, no trying to fix things. If they need advice, they'll ask. Most of the time, they just want someone to confirm that what they're saying has been received." Maya wrote a line in her notebook. Listening is a form of response that doesn't need to be filtered. I can do that training.
I know you can.
It was raining when we left the cafe. I stood at the door watching the rain hit the pavement. The water gathered into thin streams flowing along the curb. I wonder when the last time my sister saw rain was. Did she stand by the window watching the same rain, thinking the same thoughts? Maya helped me rent a small room at the community center, the rent covered by a small grant she'd applied for from a foundation. The room wasn't big. It could fit 8 chairs. The night before the training, I went to set up the space. I arranged the tables and chairs in a circle and wrote a few words, "Don't judge." Then I stood in the center of the room, imagining that in a few days, 7 people would be here practicing listening in turns. On the day of the training, everyone showed up. They came from different backgrounds. A retired nurse, a psychology student, an insurance claims adjuster, a stay-at-home mom. What they had in common was a willingness to spend time listening to strangers. I introduced myself, then asked everyone to say why they came. The retired nurse said that many of the patients she used to care for had no one to talk to, and she wanted to continue that work. The psychology student, she wanted to put theory into practice. The stay-at-home mom said, been listening to her kids for over a decade. She had plenty of practice. Then Maya started the listening exercise. In pairs, sitting face to face, one person spoke for 3 minutes while the other listened. No interrupting, no questions, no responses. After 3 minutes, they switched. The room was quiet for a long time. I watched them take turns speaking and listening. Some had tears welling up in their eyes. Not because they were saying anything particularly heavy, because finally, someone was sitting there quietly listening, without interrupting, without judging, without rushing to give advice. At the end of the day, I wrote one word in my notebook. Ready. In the first week of the helpline's operation, there were no calls. I sat in the community center for an entire afternoon, staring at the Blackfinch telephone. It was a second-hand phone Maya had found from her office. The numbers on the butts were a little faded, but it still worked. I connected the line, tested the dial tone a few times, confirmed it was working, then sat down and waited. No calls on the first day. No calls on the second. None on the third either. I started to wonder if I'd done something wrong. Was the promotion insufficient? Was the number too hard to remember? Did no one actually need this service? On the 4th day, I sat next to the phone, watching the sky outside go from light to dark. I reached out and touched the receiver, then pulled my hand back. On the 5th day, the phone rang. I picked it up, my heart pounding. I said, "Hello, this is the Irene Helline. I'm Nora, the operator." There was no response on the other end. I heard breathing very soft, like someone unsure whether to speak. I said it again. "I'm here, no rush." The silence lasted about 30 seconds. Then a young woman's voice said,
I don't know what to say.
I said, "That's okay. You don't have to say anything. I'm here." She said, "I just wanted to confirm that this number is real." I said, "It's real, I'm here." Then she started talking. She said she'd been having trouble sleeping lately, lying in bed staring at the ceiling until dawn, and during the day she couldn't wake up. She said she didn't want to tell her friends, afraid they'd think she was being dramatic. She said she didn't know what was wrong with her. I listened. I didn't interrupt. She talked for about 15 minutes, then stopped. She said, "Thank you for listening to me." I said, "Thank you for calling." She hung up. I put down the receiver, sat at the desk, and looked out the window. Sunlight streamed thin bars of light across the table. I wrote down the call time in my logbook, and in the notes column I wrote 2 words, connected. After that first call, I've been recording the duration topic every incoming call. No names, no FI and follow information, just general themes like anxiety, family, work stress. Every afternoon I went through my logbook and organized the entries. Some weeks there were no calls at all. Other weeks, 2 or 3 would come in on the same day. Some spoke rapidly as if they'd been holding things in for a long time. Others after every few sentences, as if deciding whether to continue. What they all had in common was that looking for confirmation that their voice had been received. I learned later that the first call, I was stunned for a moment, then laughed. She said she was afraid the number wasn't working, afraid I'd been sitting in an empty room for 5 days with no one calling. I said, "After you called, I knew the line was good." She said, "Are you angry?" I said, "No." She said, "Good." That call lighted on the cord on the first line of my logbook, with the note, connected. But I always knew the real connection began with the second call. The young woman with insomnia never called back, but her voice stayed in my memory. The words she said before hanging off, "Thank you for listening," taught me something. Sometimes what people need isn't an answer or even comfort, just a place where they can speak freely. When my sister wrote me that note, was she also looking for a place where she could speak freely? I don't know the answer. But I know what I'm doing now is providing that place for others, the way she once tried to do for me. One afternoon, a middle-aged woman called. Her voice was steady with no obvious emotional expression to keeping her custing pressed down at the very bottom. She said had recently quit her job to can care for home her sickble mother. She said all of this in a matter-of-fact tone, like she was reporting the weather. Then she paused and said, "What I just said, I've never told anyone. Thank you for trusting me with that. When I tell my husband about things at home, he forgets as soon as I finish. When I tell friends, they just say, be strong. I just want someone to know what I'm going through. I don't need advice. I hear you." Then she kept talking about what her mother was like when she was young, about her mother used to walk her to school. Her voice softened slightly, and her pace slowed down. She talked for nearly half an hour.
I should go bring my mother her meal.
Okay.
Can I call again next time?
Anytime. She thanked me and hung up. I sat at my desk, looking out the window. The leaves on the trees downstairs were starting to turn yellow, a few of them spinning in the wind. I turned to a new page in my logbook and wrote one word in the notes column, caregiver. On my way home that evening, I passed a flower shop and bought a bouquet of white daisies. Back in my apartment, I put them in the vase on the windowsill, next to the potted plant. My sister once said white flowers were her favorite because they looked clean. I looked at the daisies and imagined my sister seeing them before the light faded. Then I turned off the light and went to sleep. The number of calls to the Arin Hele was slowly growing. I started considering adding a voicemail feature for those who called outside working hours. I record a message, "This is the Arin Helmer and a time when you can be reached, and I will return your call within 24 hours. In the first week of voicemail, I received 2 real messages. One was from a young man who just through a breakup, couldn't sleep, and didn't know who to talk to. Another was from an elderly woman whose husband had been gone for 3 years. She ate alone every day. Another was from a child, maybe 14 or 15, who said he didn't want to go to school but was afraid to tell his parents.
I didn't think you'd actually call back.
I said I would, so I did.
I just want to see if this number was real.
It's real.
I've been feeling like crying lately, and I don't know why.
If you need to cry, just cry. You don't need a reason.
Thank you.
Thank you for calling." After hanging up, I sat at my desk, looking at the telephone. That old black phone looked ordinary, but I knew it was connecting people's lives every day. Some might call only once and never again. Others might call back weeks later. But at least in that moment they called, they didn't have to carry it alone. It made me think of the words my sister wrote. "I tried it for you. The world isn't as scary as you think." When she wrote those words, was she hoping someone would catch something for her too? My mother was cooking in the kitchen, and I sat in the living room looking at the family photo on the wall. It was taken years ago. Irene stood on my left, her hand on my shoulder, smiling especially bright. I stood up and walked in my sister's room. My mother had already moved most of the things out, leaving only a few books on the shelf and a desk lamp. I walked to bookshelf, my finger brushing across the spine. Most were history books with some novels and poetry collections mixed in. I pulled out the poetry collection my sister had been reading last. The cover was light green, the shine slightly worn. I opened it. The pages had yellowed, and a few corners were folded. I turned to the folded page. I didn't fully understand the poem, but in the margin there was a line written in pencil. The handwriting was very light. The pencil marks were little smudged, as if been touched any times after being written. She wrote it twice. "I tried it for you and I tried. One in the gown pocket for me, one hidden in the poetry collection. Maybe for mother, maybe for herself." I closed the book, held it to my chest, and stood in the empty room. The empty vase on the windowsill cast a long, thin shadow in the afternoon light. I closed my eyes and stood for a long time. Then I walked out of the room, put the book in my bag, and brought it back to my apartment. I bought a new frame, larger than the previous one. I placed the page torn from the poetry collection inside it, hanging it side by side with a note on the wall across from my desk. On the left, "Little sister, I tried it for old isn't as scary as you think. If one day I'm not here, tell Nora I tried." The same handwriting, written at different times, placed in different places, but they said the same thing. My sister had prepared before she left. She didn't just leave one note, she left a backup. She wrote the same words in the poetry collection, in case I didn't find the note in the gown, in case I didn't open that box. She had another way to let me know. She considered 2 possibilities. She was planning for the scenario where I might not find her. I sat at my desk, looking at those 2 lines. The desk lamp cast a warm glow on the glass. I imagined my sister sitting at her desk, turning on the lamp, tearing off a piece of paper, writing that line, folding it, putting it in the gown pocket. Then maybe she picked up another book, opened it, and lightly wrote another line in pencil in the margin. She did it so quietly, so carefully, like completing something she knew was important but didn't need anyone to see. I don't know what she was feeling when she wrote them, calm or broken, but I know when she wrote those words, she was thinking of me. She was thinking of what I would be like after she was gone. She prepared for me in advance. I reached toward the frame and touched the glass surface. Cool, smooth. I pulled my hand back and continued writing my records. About half a year into the Irene Hollins operation, one of the volunteers was chatting with me during a break and asked, "How many people do you think we can help?" I looked out the window and answered honestly, "I'm not sure." "Do you think anyone actually gets better because of us?" "I don't know if they'll get better, but I know that while they're on the phone with us, they don't have to face it alone." I spoke slowly, sharing my thoughts. She nodded and didn't ask again. Later, I wrote a passage in my logbook, not for anyone else to see. I wrote, "Change is hard to measure. People don't get better from one phone call, but they might decide to one day at a time, and they get through it." I later tucked that passage away with my sister's notebook. In the fall, the helpline received a call from a female college student. She spoke fast, frantically describing her situation. "Skipping class, I don't want to leave my room. I used to be outgrown, but now I feel like everyone is staring at me. My heart races and starts sweat. Am I going crazy?" "You're not going crazy. You're just going through a difficult time."
How do you know?
"Because I've had difficult times too."
Are you better now?
I'm not sure if better is the right word, but I'm still here. There was a long silence on the other end. After a while, she said softly, "Thank you for still being here." After she hung up, I sat at my desk. The leaves on the plane trees outside were turning yellow. With a gust of wind, a few fell and drifted onto the windowsill. I wondered if my sister, at the same age I am now, ever went through moments like this. If she did, how did she get through them? If she didn't, then what happened later that made her feel she couldn't keep going? That winter was especially cold. The heating at the community center wasn't great, so whenever I was on duty in the call room, I have to wrap myself in a blanket. One afternoon it started snowing outside. Not heavy flakes, but dense and steady, quickly coating the street outside the window in white. I sat at my desk, listening to the hum of the phone line. The phone didn't ring. I watched the snow through the window. Remembering building snowmen with my sister when we were kids. I was 7, she was 13. We wore gloves and rolled the snow into 2 balls, one big, one small, stacked on top of each other. My sister stole a carrot from the kitchen for the nose and 2 black buttons for the eyes. After we finished the snowman, she stood beside it furrow softly. I looked up and said, "Then let's build another one." She shook her head and replied softly, "No, it's used to it." I didn't really understand what she meant at the time. Later the snowman melted, the carrot was taken by a bird, and the buttons fell into the mud. Looking back now, the thing my sister said probably wasn't about the snowman. Near the end of winter, a caller said slowly, "I slipped in the snow and scraped my knee, but what made me sad wasn't the knee. It was lying there on the snow and realizing I had no one I wanted to call." She added sadly, "I don't have any friends. You made this call."
That doesn't count.
"It counts." She let out a small laugh on the other end, very soft and brief, but I heard it clearly. I said softly, "You laughed." She asked in confusion, "Did I?" I affirmed, "Yes." She thanked me softly, "Thank you for letting me know." After that call, I wrote a note in my logbook. She laughed. When spring came, the helpline received a call from a mother. Her voice was full of anxiety, her words coming fast as if clutching at the last rope.
My daughter has been feeling really down lately, locking herself in her room for days without coming out, and I don't know what to do.
Should I knock or wait for her to come out? Should I say something or say nothing? What have you done? I leave food at her door every day, and at night I say goodnight through the door. You're doing very well. But I feel like it's not enough. You're already doing something. That's enough. There was a long silence on the other end. Then she spoke with a choked voice.
I'm so afraid she'll end up like me. I was like this when I was little, and no one was there for me back then. I got through it, but I don't want her to have to get through it alone.
Have you ever told her about your childhood?
No, I don't want her to think it's hereditary.
Maybe knowing she's not alone in this would help.
Thank you.
After sat at my desk, looking at the new buds on the branches outside. The green was so light it was almost translucent. When my sister taught history in middle school, did she ever have students like this? Did she sat in some office too, trying to figure out how to help a child who had shut herself in? The helpline was slowly growing in scale. Maya helped me secure new funding to add an extra line. We recruited more volunteers, and the community center gave us a larger room. The new room had 4 more tables than the previous one, with a black telephone on each. I went to a second-hand market and bought a few cups and a hot water kettle, putting them on a shelf in the corner, and placed some potted plums on the windowsill. On the day of the new volunteer training, I watched them sitting at the desks practicing taking calls. Their bodies leaned forward slightly, hands holding the receivers, occasionally jotting down a few words on sticky notes before continuing to listen. Their postures and movements looked familiar, the same way I held myself when I took calls. I stood at the door for a while, then returned to my own desk. In my logbook, I wrote down the new volunteers' names and shift times, neatly arranged, with notes on each person's availability. Then I flipped to the very first page of the logbook and saw the first call log, connected. That was Maya's call. Back then, I was the only person sitting in front of this line. Now there were more than a dozen. My sister's note led me to pick up the first call, and then that call became 2, 3, dozens, hundreds. Every call was a confirmation that someone was listening, confirmation that someone was willing to stay on the line. One call came from an elderly woman. She spoke calmly, sharing her story. My daughter passed away several years ago, and now I pellers long count of him those my fours. The biggest eyes now pels to fella to connection. Irene, my daughter's name was Irene too. Her voice was calm, no crying, no trembling. She was just telling a story about someone who shared the same name. I didn't interrupt her. She talked for about 20 minutes, from her daughter's childhood all the way to when she left for college.
I haven't talked about her to anyone in a long time.
Thank you for sharing that with me.
Thank you for listening.
After she hung up, I sat at my desk. The potted plant on the windowsill cast a slanted shadow in the afternoon light. I thought about how my sister's name was being spoken by more and more people. Through the helpline's name, through the website introduction, through the callers who dialed in. Her name was no longer just a marker of someone who had disappeared. It had become a verb, an action of connection. I added a new section to the helpline's website titled About Irene. I only wrote 2 sentences. She told me the world as scary as it seems. No more information than that. No biography, no profession, no mention of how she left. Just those 2 sentences. Later I would occasionally check the visitor count for that section. Not high, but not 0. People were reading it. Some would pause for a few seconds or longer after seeing those words, then leave. One caller mentioned those words on the phone, her voice choked with emotion.
I cried when I read I choose to believe her, because I also want to believe in something, but I don't know what I can believe in.
You can start by believing in this phone call.
I do.
One day I received a handwritten letter. It was sent to the community center, addressed to the Irene helpline. The paper was ordinary lined paper, the handwriting neat, with no signature. The writer said she had called the helpline once a year ago, at her lowest point. She didn't say much on the phone, but the operator stayed on the line, waiting until she spoke first. The letter read, "After that day, I slowly got better, not all at once, bit by bit. I can't be sure if the phone call was the reason, but I know for certain that someone heard my voice that day. I still don't know who answered the phone, but I want her to know that her voice has stayed in my mind." I refolded the letter and put it back in the envelope, placing it in my desk drawer. I couldn't reply to her because she hadn't left an address. But I didn't need to reply. The letter had already done what it needed to do. It let me know that my sister's note was still reaching forward, extending into the hands of people I didn't know. The helpline volunteers was a woman named Sarah. She was a very quiet person, didn't talk much, but she was especially patient when answering calls.
Nora, have you ever called your sister's number? Yes. I called my mom.
Her mom had passed away 3 years ago, but she still kept that number. Every time she missed her, she would dial it and listen to the empty number tone.
Sometimes I just want to hear that sound to remind me that she was once connected. I understand.
We sat in the break room, sunlight streaming in and forming a bright patch on the floor. No one spoke, but it wasn't awkward.
Time for my shift.
She sat down in front of the phone, picked up the receiver, adjusted her posture, and began to wait. I sat in the break room a little longer, finishing the last sip of tea in my cup. Then I stood up and returned to my own desk.
My sister died by suicide last year. I've never told anyone about it. I think about her every day, but I don't know how to express it, and my family never brings it up. Sometimes when I'm walking the street and see someone who looks like her, I'll follow them for a few glances, then I realize it's not her.
Am I not just missing someone?
Have you ever felt this way too?
My sister's gone too.
Then are you better now?
I'm still here.
Me too. Thank you for not trying to comfort me.
I'm not good at comforting people.
That's enough.
I wrote in my logbook, "A brother, he's missing his sister." Then I closed the book and watched the rain through the window. Once on the subway home, I saw a billboard with one word. Sister. It wasn't an ad for any product, it seemed like a public service announcement, with a blue-gray background and just that one word in the center. I came home, took off my shoes, and sat on the sofa for a while. Then I stood up, walked to my desk, and looked at the two frames on the wall. My sister's 2 lines of writing sat side by side. In the About Irene section, beneath the original 2 sentences, I wrote, "If you're reading this, I'm also telling you on her behalf. The world isn't as scary as you think." She said so. One autumn night, I dreamed of my sister. Scene in the dream was one I'd never seen before. She was sitting on a balcony, a cup of tea in front of her, a book in her hands.
You're here. What are you reading? This one's good. Take it with you. Okay. There's a tree over there that grows very tall. I watch it grow a little every day. Are you doing well?
She didn't answer. I opened my eyes. The ceiling glowed faintly in the darkness. My cheeks were wet and my pillow was damp. Balcony, the tea, the book, the tree, and her smile. That smile was so real. After dawn, I got up, washed up, walked to my desk, and opened my logbook. On a new page, I wrote, "I dreamed of her. She looked well." Then I closed the book and left for the community center.
A local newspaper ran a story about the Irene Helline. Place was in the middle of the community section. The article quoted the 2 sentences from the website and mentioned the Helline's hours and phone number. I didn't give an interview. Maya was the one who talked to the reporter. She asked me beforehand. In the weeks after the newspaper came out, the number of calls increased noticeably. Many people said on the phone that they'd seen the article and wanted to try if the number worked.
After I read the article, I looked who Irene was, but there's nothing online. What kind of person was your sister?
She was someone who would put a note in the pocket of her graduation gown.
She must have loved you very much.
Yes. After hanging up, I wrote in my logbook. She asked me what kind of person my sister was. I told her about the note. Later, I cut out the article and put it in the same drawer as my sister's belongings. A high school girl called. She said she'd been crying a lot lately and didn't know why. She said her friends thought she'd been acting strange, but she couldn't explain it.
I'm afraid I'm really sick.
You're not necessarily sick. You might just need someone to listen.
If I talk to you, will you think I'm weird?
No. Then she started talking about her life. She talked about many small things. Exams, family, confusion about the future. She would go off topic, jumping from one subject to another, but I didn't interrupt her. Are you done?
Yes.
Thank you for sharing this with me.
I think I feel a little better.
That's good.
Can I call again next time?
Anytime. After she hung up, I looked at the sky outside. The autumn clouds were high and thin, drifting especially slowly across the blue sky.
I sat for a while, then picked up my pen and wrote in my logbook. High school student first call, cried, but her voice was bright when she left.
One night, the phone rang close to midnight. I had about to turn off the lights and go home, but seeing the caller ID, I hesitated for a moment and picked up anyway.
Hello, I don't know.
You already called, so it was the right thing to do.
I've been standing by the bridge for an hour. I don't know what to do next.
Can you keep talking to me right now?
Yes.
Good. Take your time. You can say whatever you want. She started talking. She said it was her birthday today, and no one remembered. She had walked to the bridge alone, looking at the water below, feeling that if she jumped, everything would be over. Maybe a classmate from before.
That classmate was lucky because she saved this number. Then we kept talking about ordinary things, her favorite color, a cat she once had the street lived on as a child. She talked more and more, and her voice gradually became less fragile. It's dawn. Yes. I don't want to jump anymore. That's good.
She said, "Thank you for not hanging up." I said, "I'll never hang up." Her last words were, "I'm going home." And then she hung up. I sat at my desk. The sky outside had shifted from dark blue to pale gray. I looked down at my logbook and wrote one word on that page. She went home. That winter, I received an email. The sender was unknown to me. The message was short. "Hello, I called your helpline a year ago, the night I was standing on the bridge. You talked with me through the whole night. I didn't jump that night. Now I'm in college. I've made a few friends and I still think about that night sometimes. I wanted you to know I'm alive. Thank you." I finished reading the email, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to reply, but she'd used a temporary email address and my reply might bounce. In the end, I typed just one word. Received. Then I hit send.
I took a screenshot of the email. It's in a folder called Letters. That night I sat at my desk, opening and closing the folder, looking at the text in the shot. Then I turned off computer and lay down in bed. The ceiling was as blurry as ever in the darkness. I closed my eyes and remembered the voice from that early morning call. Her voice had been so light, so fragile, like it could scatter at any moment. But gradually it had steadied, growing more and more stable until dawn. She was in college now. She was alive. Following spring, the number of Helpline volunteers had 20. I made a new schedule for me, filling the day, evening, and weekend shifts. Among the new arrivals, a few were psychology majors. During training, they offered emotional suggestion. I copied their suggestions onto the whiteboard, alongside the original training content. One afternoon, I sat in the break room, looking at the new green branches outside a window, and suddenly realized I was smiling. I paused, then realized it had been a long time since I'd smiled like that without realizing it. Not because of anything funny, just because I felt at peace, felt like things were moving forward. I sat there without moving, letting that smile linger for a while. Then I stood up, returned to my desk, and continued organizing my logbook. The call records were arranged by date, placed them in gray folders with date ranges written on the covers, and put them in their designated spot on the shelf. These records didn't contain anyone's name, but they represented real moments that had existed. Someone spoke, someone listened, someone didn't hang up. One day my mother called. Her voice sounded a bit lighter than usual. She was tidying up the flower bed in the backyard and wanted to replant the rose my sister had grown. How? I said I'd come help on the weekend. She said okay. That weekend I went to my mother's house. We crouched in the backyard together, loosened the old soil and planting the new seedlings. As she worked, might love these flowers when she was little. Every spring she'd crouch right here watching put them in vases. I said another said, my mother's of hers, that she would cut them set him flockers.
If only she were still here.
Yeah, but neither of us cried. We just stood there looking at the ground, the sun shining on the new soil, its color a deep brown. Later, my mother went inside to cook and I sat on back steps. The wind blew, carrying the smell of soil. I imagined my sister crouching in front of the flower bed, wearing that light-colored sweater, her fingers searching through the dirt for something. She looked up at me, then lowered her head in dirt for something. I sat on the steps for a long time, until my mother called me in for dinner. That summer, I decided to make the Urin Helung an official non-profit organization. Maya helped me sum all the registrations, and together we drafted the bylaws and set the budget. On the day the registration was approved, she sent me a list. I sat at my desk and replied, "Thank you." Then I recorded the approval date in my logbook and drew a line underneath it. Years from now, if someone flipped through these records, they would see this point in time. From a note in a pocket to a registered organization. I hadn't stopped thinking about what my sister would think if she saw all of this, but I wasn't sure if my imagination was correct. She might think I'd gone too far, or she might think this was exactly what she wanted. But no matter what she might think, I knew this was what I wanted to do. The helpline was moving forward, and so was I. Even if my sister stayed where she was, her name was walking with me. One autumn afternoon, I sat and reopened the box containing my sister's belongings. It had been several times before, and I'd gone contents multiple rounds. It had already been organized. But that day I dug to the bottom and found I hadn't noticed before. Off with no recipient, no address, no mark. Inside was a piece of neatly folded letter paper. I opened it. It was my sister's handwriting. "Nora, congratulations on writing. I knew you this letter." Just that one sentence. She had placed the letter at the very bottom of the box, covered by the scarf. She might have put it in at the same time as the note, or perhaps even earlier. I sat at my desk, looking at those words, sunlight falling on the corner of the paper. She had left everything she could. The note, the pencil words in the poetry collection, this letter. It was as if before she left, she had written down everything she wanted to say and scattered them in different places, waiting for me to find them one by one. I refolded the letter and put it in a new folder, writing on the cover, Irene, Subsequent Discoveries. I placed it with the previous notes. One day, a young girl came to visit the community center. She'd seen the volunteer recruitment information on the website and emailed to ask if she could come take a look first. I gave her a tour of the call room. She stood at the doorway, looking at the room's setup, a few tables, black telephones, the schedule on the wall, the potted flowers on the windowsill. She didn't go inside, just stood at the door and looked for a while.
"Don't you get bored sitting here waiting for calls every day?"
Sometimes, but it's not boring when the phone rings.
"What's the longest call you've ever taken?"
About an entire night.
Can you tell me about it?
There was a girl who told me on the phone that she was standing on a bridge. I talked with her until dawn. Later, she emailed to say she was still here.
Can I sign up?
Of course. I printed out the application form and training schedule and handed them to her. She took them, folded them, put them in her pocket, nodded, and turned to leave. I stood at the call room door, watching her figure disappear at the end of the hallway. The potted plant on the windowsill cast a crisp shadow in the midday light. One winter night, I sat on my apartment sofa, holding the graduation gown. The garment bag had been removed, and the gown was folded on my lap. I reached out and ran my hand over the fabric. The gold trim at the collar had begun to fray in places, but I didn't repair it. Those worn marks were left by my sister. They belonged to her. I spread the gown open and slipped my hand into the right pocket. It was empty. The note was now in a frame on the wall, no longer something needed to be hidden in a pocket waiting to be discovered. But my hand still paused in that pocket, feeling the fabric's texture. My sister's hand had once been in the same place. When she placed the note inside, her fingers had touched the same lining. Across time, we met in that same pocket. I folded the gown, put it back in the garment bag, and hung it in the corner of my closet. It no longer needed to be worn to a graduation ceremony, but it needed to be kept. It was the closest thing I had to my sister. A garment she had worn, I had worn, and where both our fingers had lingered in the same pocket. Today is the 3rd anniversary of the Irene Heltleast. I didn't plan any celebrations or tell anyone. In the afternoon, I went to community center and sat at my desk as usual. The phone didn't ring. That black telephone was still the same old one, the numbers on its buttons even more worn now, but the line was still active. If someone called right now, it would ring. I placed my hand on the telephone, feeling its cold surface. 3 years. In 3 years, this line had connected so many voices. I would never know their names, never see their faces, but they had lingered on this line, saying things they'd never have said to anyone else. Then they hung up and returned to their own lives. Some would get better, some wouldn't. But at least during the time they were on the phone, they weren't alone. They weren't alone. I stood up, pushed my chair back under the desk, and picked up my coat from the back of the chair. Before leaving, I looked back at the room one last time. The telephone sat quietly on the table, and the potted flam on the windowsill glowed green in the sunlight. I stood on the steps, squinting as my eyes adjusted to the brightness. Then I walked down the steps and headed home. Not fast, not slow. No need to chase anything.